Welcome to Off Panel. Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the comic book Podfather and the host of the long-running interview podcast Word Balloon. It's John Siuntres. Thanks for coming on, John.
David, my pleasure. I that is a flattering nickname, Podfather, and I do appreciate it. I always like to point out I'm not the first, but I know I've been around a long time.
Well, it's a term I'm stealing from Bill Simmons, who does the Bill Simmons podcast and previously did the BS Report at ESPN. People call him the Podfather. He wasn't the first, but he was one of the first sports guys that really blew up with it. And there may have been people who preceded you, but I don't know. I mean, you're kind of the comic book podcast guy. I think that's a fair statement.
Well, that's very nice. Comic Geek Speak has been around a couple months before I started. I think a lot of us were all inspired by that Wired article in, I want to say, February of 2005 about podcasting. And maybe I saw it a couple weeks after the guys did. I don't know. But, and I'll even say Word Balloon started off to be a video documentary where I knew a bunch of local people that made comics, among them Brian Azzarello and Joe Gentile, who's a publisher of Moonstone Books that doesn't do as many comics as they used to, but they still do short story collections of like the Green Hornet and Kolchak the Night Stalker and every now and then they still push out a few comics and stuff. But and also Max Allen Collins was one of those prospective people that I did long interviews with. And the video guy just kind of got too busy to put anything together. And I was sitting with all this great content and I'm like, well, I'm going to start a website. And because at the time, Jonah Weiland, formerly of Comic Book Resources, had posted a handful of comic one-on-one interviews that he did. And I'm like, I'll do that. And, I figure I'll go to the message boards of these people and let people know they can find them there. So that's how Word Balloon started. And I started in the first day was May 10th of 2005 when I posted the first 4 interviews. And then about 14 months later or 13 months later, it was September of 2006. A listener's like, you ought to make your thing a podcast because, or put them on iTunes because really you're podcasting when you think about it. And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. Okay. And I'd heard the term and everything. And I go, yeah, I would just figured put them on the website and let people get them. Mm-hmm. And I had an original RSS feed for things. And then I started the new RSS feed back in September of 2006. But by that point, I had done like 50 episodes or so.
I think one of the hilarious things about it. So, just for a little background on me, I just did my 100th episode published this week. And
I saw that.
And one of the funniest things is like, oh, I feel all accomplished and everything like that. Your first podcast went up the month before iTunes even started carrying podcasts. So yeah. You beat Apple to doing podcasts effectively. So I'm like, I can't really feel like I'm that. I mean, I feel accomplished, but at the same time, I'm like, it's all relative. But
well, I like some of the big stars of podcasting that beat their chest. And, oh, man, I was here at the beginning. I started in 2009. I'm like, yeah, go away. I'm like, and I do. I kind of say to the people that started in 2005, I put it in astronaut terms. We're like the Mercury astronauts. Mm-hmm. And then the guys who came in who heard us and then are like, hey, I want to do a podcast. And there were some others like Around Comics was one and Comic Timing. I think Ian Levinston was really a big fan of Comic Geek Speak and stuff. Like they're the Geminis mm-hmm. and stuff like that. And then I'd say by about 2010 or so, then you got I never even had an Apollo class. I'm like, but you guys are like space shuttle astronauts, which is cool. That's mm-hmm. cool. There's, it's good to be an astronaut and stuff. So, but truly, that's 100 is great, man. And it's, I think that's a body of work to be proud of. Absolutely, man. I was very proud when I hit my first 100 podcasts.
Yeah. Well, and, I want to go back to one other point in history, even before you guys, the funny thing is podcasts as a term didn't even come out until the year before you started. So did you even know that what you were doing was a podcast when you first posted those MP3 interviews, or is that not even a term that was familiar to you at that point?
Well, I was, like I said, I had seen the Wired interview because Adam, and now I'm blanking from MTV, the true Podfather, the guy who had MTV.com and was a VJ. God, I'm totally blanking on his name right now. Uh, but he was the first. And the article in Wired really talked about him. So I did kind of consider it a podcast, but like you said, Apple wasn't doing anything with iTunes yet. And in fact, I was so thrilled and knew that I was on the right track because among my first 10 episodes, I spoke to Jeff Parker.
Right.
And Jeff was doing an indie comic then called The Interman. He had just started a couple of things at Marvel, and it was even before Agents of Atlas or anything like that. And Mike Waringo contacted me by email, and he was a Mac guy and I was a PC guy, and he's like, I'm having trouble downloading your stuff, and can you help me out? And I'm like, yeah, can you come on my show? He's like, oh yeah, no problem. And I've said this before, and I always say it when it's the anniversary of his passing. He was such a great guy from almost day one that was like, I love what you do. And I'm like, well, you're a pro, so how, am I doing okay? Am I asking stupid questions or insulting questions?
Mm-hmm.
What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And he was great. And he really was gentle hand, but was just like, I like what you do. And again, I mean, I had this background in sports interviewing and radio interviewing, so I kind of knew what I was doing going in a bit. But I would, it's been a fun 12 years, and I've been very lucky that the majority of the people that I interview seem to have a good time. And if someone is unsure, they can go to a friend. Brian Wood wasn't sure about coming on my show, and Azarello was like, no, talk to John. He's all right. And that was really.
It's like at that point you have comic creators being your own PR firm for you.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, one of the things. First off, I just want to say Mike Waringo. If I could have any person, living or dead, like on my show, Mike Waringo was such an important artist to me. Like the Flash run and his design for Impulse and everything like that. Man, that guy just spoke to me, and his stuff. When I was a kid, I would always try to emulate his art, and so that is quite the feather in your cap to have Mike Waringo on your side, I think.
Thanks, and I agree with you, and I loved his Fantastic Four with Wade.
Yep.
And, it's funny, a good portion of his Flash run with Wade and others and Impulse and everything, I had checked out on comics during the mid-'90s just because, God, I'm trying to do the math and stuff. It was a combination of not really being crazy about where story was going, because I really think it was art over story after the Image Revolution. And I think everyone was really trying hard with splash pages and not as hard with plots and dialogue. And I mean, things just got, and there's a reason why, I think that was, another contributing factor to the comics implosion of the 90s and the speculator market. I mean, comics were being treated more like baseball cards than they were things to read.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. I'm like, I'm the schmuck that's actually reading this stuff. I'm not buying these things to finance my kids' education or anything.
I kind of feel like that was the stretch where it was the first time where people were like, wow, we can make a lot of money off this rather than we can tell stories with this. And I know that Marvel and DC obviously always wanted to make money, but it was kind of like those two things went hand in hand up until the 90s, where one kind of took the lead from the other in a way that it never had previously. But
yeah, and I think, and again, the gimmicks, but I think the gimmicks, I could be wrong because I really should study this period harder. Who came up with the gimmicks first? Were they the Image guys or were they the Marvel and DC guys? But it seemed to me as an outsider that they were taking the lead from a lot of what the Image guys were doing once their handcuffs were off and could just make their own books. And from late shipping, but also again all the stupid gimmicks, the hologram covers.
Oh man, I grew
and
up
that's
in
why
the 90s.
I like DC with the lenticular covers. I'm a sucker. I like that stuff. I bought my Flash 22 of DC Rebirth recently, and like every issue of the Button that had the lenticular covers and everything. But I worry that that's the bigger draw, and it's interesting how it's become almost a side business now, and that they still cater to those people that like variant covers and all of that stuff. Just give me the damn story. I don't that.
Yeah, to a certain degree, it's like you almost feel like a lenticular cover is like the canary in the coal mine. But at the
Yeah.
same time, like, I have to admit, there's a part of me that's like, wow, if I could get a lenticular cover, if I could just get a normal cover, I'd probably go lenticular cover because I grew up in the 90s and like hologram covers speak to me. My 100th episode was called the Holofoil Anniversary for the explicit reason that I love holofoil covers and I find them to be hilarious. So it's like that period. I think it's all cyclical, right? It's
Absolutely.
we're in this nostalgic period for the 90s, from fashion to like TV shows. I mean, we got like Will and Grace is coming back.
Oh God,
Roseanne
yeah.
is coming back. I mean, all
Yep.
these things are coming back. It's because the 90s are alive in 2017.
Yeah, but that's kind of how I mean,
That's the way it is for
sadly, being
everything.
older, exactly, man. It feels like a boomerang because it was the '60s and the '80s, and it was the '70s and the '90s and stuff. I
Hmm.
mean, I think yeah, there's definitely, or I guess maybe in the first 2000s, I mean, these things come back and that's okay. And actually, I think they come back distilled and all the impurities are gone, and it is only like the cream of the crop of the decade that's nostalgic right now. That's what we get. So we don't get the dregs, thankfully, and stuff. And the mullets will stay in the '90s where they belong. The leisure suits. The leisure suits. My favorite thing is the $6 Million Man. Watch it from the first season to the last season, and you have the evolution and devolution of the leisure suit.
Hmm.
And thank God that's no longer around.
I would generally agree with you, but I did see a comic bagged with a trading card, and I never thought I was going to see that again.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, so to dial it back to the pre word balloon days. I know
I,
your background is in radio. You've been working in radio for a long time, sports, everything really. You're also interested in interviews, but you were also interested in comics. How did you know you wanted to kind of mash that all together and make that a thing? I mean, before you
well,
even knew when word balloon was a twinkle in your eye, John.
Well, two things. I think, I mean, like you said, I had a solid career in radio. I was in a network, and I can name it because technically it no longer exists. It was the Sporting News. It was the Sporting News Radio Network, Sporting News Magazine.
Hmm.
Paul Allen, the Microsoft billionaire, bought Sporting News Magazine, and he bought One on One Sports Radio Network, and he combined them. And for a while, Sporting News was able to compete with Fox and ESPN and have its share of affiliates and had good reporters and good hosts. But the management wasn't really giving me the opportunities to broadcast and really kind of kept me behind the scenes.
Hmm.
So I wanted some sort of outlet and wanted to do interviewing. I was doing some boxing interviewing for the network, and I had been doing it for my local radio station that I worked for 10 years prior to that, and also wrote for Ring and Boxing Illustrated. So I had this background and would do online interviews and interviews that would wind up on the network. But this jerky program director who's no longer in radio was like, "Hey, get back there and produce some more features and make commercials. We don't need you on the air."
Hmm.
And I'm like, "All right." So I needed some sort of outlet to continue to generate interviews and hosting kind of material. Paul Allen had bought the Science Fiction Museum in Seattle,
Hmm.
and I went to the website and I saw that they were doing some sort of weekend where they had maybe comic book artists in to kind of help the kids draw, maybe a couple panels. And I said, if you guys are interested for the website for the museum, I'd be happy to do comic book interviews because I just thought it would be. I know I was aware of Fanboy Radio
Sure.
in Texas Christian University, Scott Hines show, and I'm like, I kind of like his show, but I think I'd ask different questions. So,
Hmm.
I'm like, maybe there's something there, and typical kind of company started by a tech billionaire. It was like, hey, if you guys have any cool ideas, let us know and maybe we'll help you develop them.
Yeah.
So I sent it up the chain to Paul Allen's people, and they were very nice back and said, yeah, that sounds like fun. You should just do it on your own. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. I think I will do it on my own. So, like I said, I had thought about doing this this documentary first, and that really was December of 2004 and early 2005 when I started collecting these interviews and stuff. And I just decided, I'm like I said, when the documentary fell through, I'm like, well, I got at least 4 really good conversations that if I put an intro and a close to and everything, they'll make sense as a show.
Hmm.
And I'm like, maybe I'll release that and I'll set up the website. So I got the domain, and I thought Word Balloon was a clever name, although my father would kick me in the ass for it because you shouldn't name stuff at the bottom of the alphabet because usually lists are done alphabetically.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's word balloon always at the bottom. It's like, oh man, so I wasn't thinking like that. Ken, oh God, what was his name? The guy who created Word Jazz.
Oh, I
He
have
was
no idea.
Word Jazz is this very specific spoken word thing that this old advertising guy, Ken, and shame on me that I don't remember his name, Chicago legend. Word Jazz became this very big thing in the 50s and 60s. He opened for like the Grateful Dead and stuff like that, and he would just do these interesting spoken word performances with kind of this jazz riff behind him. And oh my God, Ken Nordine, hello. And he was the voice of Levi's 501 jeans. And if you look up YouTube commercials, if you look up Ken Nordine, you'll likely find examples of Word Jazz and his Levi's commercials and stuff. I mean, like the greatest radio voice ever. And I'm like, I'm like Word Balloon because that makes sense because it's a dialogue bubble and it's that kind of describes what the show is. It's a dialogue bubble, and I'm like, I like that. Yeah, that works.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how it started.
I think it's funny. I'm super envious of the fact that you started in 2005, if only for one reason. By the time I got into podcasting, all the names were taken. And like, it's the same thing for comics or for websites, because I named my site Sketched without any vowels.
Yes.
Part of the reason why is because if you try to find a .com that like makes any sense that isn't taken, it's going to cost you like $1 billion.
I think there are more comic book podcasts than movie critique podcasts and a lot of other more common mainstream subjects. And I honestly think that and I mean this and truly, not just saying this because I'm on your show, you do a great job. I, in particular, really enjoyed one of your conversations with Brian Hibbs.
Oh,
I
thank
thought
you.
Very informative. He's a smart guy. You led him well. It was a great conversation. But the best and worst thing about podcasting, and I think you are in the good portion of this, anyone can do it.
Right.
And that's very great as far as an entry point, but it also allows for a lot of shitty podcasts, let's be honest.
Yeah, no, and it is kind of funny because like you were saying that there is a lot of comic podcasts, and there's also relative to like film and everything else. I mean, it really is kind of amazing. It's kind of like that the people say that every person who writes about comics wants to actually write comics themselves. And it is kind of funny when you look throughout the history of comics, you look at like somebody like Paul Levitz. He started out making zines, right? Wasn't that his background? Yep. And a lot, there's an entire history. I think Roy Thomas also did things like that.
Yes,
not zines, but I think he was a letter writer and he did all kinds of stuff. But it is kind of funny that there's this entire history of people who have started out wanting to do this, and so their kind of gateway is writing about it or talking about it. And I don't know about you. I don't know if you have any interest in it. Personally, I have no interest in actually making my own comics because I'm going to be honest, it seems like a lot of work and I got a day job.
Well, you're right. And also, if I were an artist, I might consider, putting some of my ideas down. But to ask, I mean, I've seen bad first comics, and I don't want a bad first comic if I were to do one. And I know a lot of great artists, but I would never impose on their time of their livelihood to, hey, can you help me with my little idea? I won't deny that there have been some ideas. They're not superheroes. I have no interest in doing superheroes. I'll let the professionals do that because I do think it's a tightrope. I do think that you're in for a lot of revisions and you can't do everything that you think.
Right.
Dan Slott and I just had this conversation where it's true. I think a lot of fans and a lot of fan fiction are, well, if I were writing Spider-Man, I'd do this. And it's like, yeah, because there's nobody at Marvel telling you no. Now, if you actually submit that idea to Marvel, let's see how many yeses and how many no's you get. And stuff.
Right.
But yeah, mostly it's the idea of, finding a great artist that isn't like, already trying to make his own stuff and everything. So I do have something in the works. It's small. It'll be digital and it'll be very reasonable when it's made. And we'll see. And I mean, I have other ideas, but they're all small because, like I said, I just can't see asking someone to commit to my 130-page epic that would take 6 months to draw.
Right.
If they only had that time to do. So yeah, it's not my own time, but it's an artist's time.
Yeah, you always have Kickstarter though. I mean,
yeah. Boy, I'll tell you. the more I hear about Kickstarter, the more it frightens me in terms of
Oh yeah.
the labor of running it and fulfilling all the premiums and all that. God, Jimmy Palmiotti, Paul Jenkins, they're guys that do it consistently and do it well, and they've got and they handle it. I mean, and they do it knowing, well, that's part of the job.
Mm-hmm.
But man, it scares the hell out of me from even thinking about that. I have a Patreon account,
Right.
and I'm very pleased that my listeners support that. And even that, it's like, God, I just feel like, oh, I should give them something more than what I'm doing.
Yeah, I started a Patreon like April 1st or so, and
Okay.
I have this guilt in my brain. I'm like, am I giving them good enough experience there? Is this enough for you guys? I don't know.
Well, and I do well, forgive me, I do the public radio kind of thing of, hey, if you like this, and especially right now, I'm between full-time radio jobs. I'm doing a part-time job at a news station, and I'm like, it's not your responsibility, but if you can help, and it's like I said, it's the public radio model of, do you like this? Is it worth your time? That can you give me a buck? I mean, it's that basic. And sometimes I've said, is it worth the price of a comic book? And I think, well, if I'm putting out 5 to 10 episodes a month, that's a lot longer than reading one comic book. I'm like, so I think I'm adding to the experience of the hobby, and people are getting something out of what I'm doing. So I don't feel.
I feel like Patreon videos are like the comic book equivalent of the hour-long PBS infomercial where they beg you for money, basically.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, it is totally.
I do think it's really interesting because you're talking. There's two fields that it seems like there's like just an unbelievable influx of people. One, it's like, people who want to make comics are going to write about comics and they're going to talk about comics and everything like that, like we already covered. But podcasting, like you said, it's easy. There's like little overhead. You just get, if you get a microphone, or if you don't get a microphone, some people, sometimes I think they only record in bathrooms. I don't even know.
I agree with you. Yes.
But I mean, it seems like a lot of times people think that you can just jump into it, and you can. And so you have this massive influx of people, and there's all these different avenues you can promote on social media. You have, I guess forums still exist. You have Reddit. You have all kinds of different places. And I think the amazing thing is in a lot of ways, because do you feel like when you first started back in 2005 that because what you were doing was fresh and because you had a radio background and so there's a certain quality that comes with it, do you feel like you almost had an easier time of making an audience? Or do you think because you kind of had to explain this is a podcast that it made it more difficult?
I thought it wasn't hard to explain to people because
It's just an interview.
I did always put down, hey, hi, two things. One, I would approach the creator directly. It was still a novelty.
Mm-hmm.
I'm quoting George Burns talking about the golden days of radio. And he said, we were all in the top 10. There were only 8 of us. and I love that. And it's true. I mean, that's the thing. So there were so few doing interviews that I think it was a novelty to the creators. This is something new. But I explained it if they didn't understand. I'm like, it's kind of like internet radio. That's how I'd explain podcasting and keep it that simple and say, hey, this is my background in sports and everything. So to kind of assure them that I had come from a background of an interviewing medium,
Mm-hmm.
broadcast, certainly a spoken word medium like that. And they seem to understand. So that was okay. And then also I did use the social media of the day, as you started to say, forums,
Mm-hmm.
and MySpace was brand new. And hey, I was right there and was very proud of my MySpace friends and beyond Tom. And, so that was okay. And jumped on Twitter pretty early and everything. And Facebook at first, I had a younger nephew who's like, yeah, that's kind of, for high school kids and, more for college kids and high school kids. I'm like, well, then I won't do Facebook right away.
Right.
So I did come to Facebook like a couple of years late, not as late as grandma did. And certainly by the time grandma has the Facebook and look at my grandson, so that's good though, man, because, that's showing the acceptance. It's the grandma complex that was described to me by some techies about the difficulties of understanding how to get a podcast and downloading. And it's like, it's not as simple that your grandmother can't just pop on. It's getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting now that there are platforms like Stitcher and certainly Spotify. And who'd you just say?
TuneIn.
Yeah, TuneIn, certainly. Absolutely. That have kind of come to aggregate to some degree. And it's interesting that Spotify, You have to be invited to get in on Spotify. At least I'm not on Spotify yet. I don't know if you're on Spotify yet. Right?
Oh, I've been in Spotify since the first day. Just kidding.
Have you?
No, I'm not. I wish.
Well, that's the thing, and isn't it interesting? Because I do believe. I mean, I'm a big liberal. I'm an old-fashioned liberal. Let me throw that out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe in citizen media, and I do think that podcasting can be a very powerful, effective force. I mean, we've seen people break through because of their podcast, not because of their broadcast background. And I can tell you, as someone who has worked in broadcasting, they still don't get it. And it cracks me up that they still don't get it. And at least the stuffed shirts that are all running things, all the suits don't seem to get it. And they get it to a degree that, all right, let's put our radio programs and make them available digitally. And that's fine. And I think other things are shaking out. But as far as making original content, there are some stations that get it. But I know, at least in Chicago, it's still a mystery to them. And I'm glad, because that puts me on equal footing with them, despite what the FCC tries to do in getting rid of net neutrality and things like that, as they currently are. So
I do think one of the interesting things is, despite the fact that podcasts have been around for, I don't know, depending on when you want to start it, maybe like 17 years, maybe 15 years, depends on who you ask. You still have this wild, wild west aspect to it, where it's like nobody really knows how to monetize them. And even businesses know that people listen to them, but they don't really know how to, it's like you don't really know how to inject yourself into that area. Like, how do I find the right audience? How do I find the right podcast for me? And like, do you put yourself in a network? And if you put yourself in a network, am I going to put myself in the right one that's going to put me in the right places? Who knows? And so it becomes this weird place where it's tough to monetize, both for people like us who do the podcast, but also for the businesses who are trying to leverage the population that's listening there, which is growing by leaps and bounds, at least by the people who want to make podcasts, which is seemingly everyone.
Yeah, I think the one percenters of podcasters, the Adam Carollas, the Chris Hardwicks, the Kevin Smiths, they have a big enough audience that they can present to an advertiser. And then there's also networks like Podcast One, created by the former radio man who ran CBS's syndication company, Westwood One. I kind of, when people tell me he's a podcasting genius, it's like, he's George Steinbrenner, and he's just picking up all the Yankees, and he's picking up the top celebrities that already are coming with a 6-figure or more audience. I'm not impressed. Mm-hmm. I'm more impressed with Serial being a true crime thing and becoming a phenomenon purely by its own content. That's impressive. And then there's Jimmy's Lunch for the Day, and he's telling you what he ate for lunch from the school menu. That's the low end of podcasting. And then there is that sweet middle that I think I'm in, where and maybe it's higher than the middle, I don't know, but at least I've got a significant thousands audience. It's not 100,000 audience as far as each episode, but it's a decent enough thing that I have to kind of hand deliver to an advertiser and explain to them. You're right. A lot of big advertisers will be like, well, if they physically buy something, then we'll pay you. And it's like, that is a threshold. How dare you? You don't hold TV and radio to those standards.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, luckily, again, we almost have to, as being a second tier of podcasters that have a significant audience, but not a gigantic audience, can go to a like-minded advertiser that like I did with In Stock Trades and Discount Comic Book Service. They understand that I am speaking to their audience and letting our shared audience know, hey, if you want to buy books, go to these guys because they're cheaper than Amazon.
Yeah.
And it's that simple, and they know and they get it. And also, I charge them a reasonable amount of money. I don't ask for the moon.
Right.
And it's gonna be interesting. It's a slow learning curve, but it should be, because I don't think everyone is deserving of immediate advertising money. I think they have to prove their impact to an audience. And I mean, luckily, anecdotally, I can point to people who just independently on social media go, I never would have read Comic Book X.
Yeah.
Had I not heard, Creator Y on John Word Balloon show. And it's like, okay, awesome.
Yeah, there's very few things that make me happier about what I've done in my years about writing about comics and podcasting and everything, where people say they listen to my podcast and they picked up something because of the conversation I had with the creator. I mean, like one person I had on my show was Daniel Warren Johnson, who does Extremity at Skybound/Image,
Cool.
and I had a bunch of people who said they picked it up just because of the podcast. And that, but first off, I'm a super fan of that book, so it made me very happy that they did that. But it also made me happy because I'm like, wow, I'm actually having an impact. That's really weird.
Absolutely.
But yeah, no, I do think it's a really weird time for comic books or for podcasts, and I do think it's fun. There's part of me that's thought about going to like MeUndies or like all those other people who like
Sure.
advertise on everything. And I'm just like, come on, guys, you're already advertising with them. Why not me too? But I know that I'm sure that's part of a network buy, right?
I think so. Or yeah, I mean, again, Hardwick has his full network.
Yeah.
Corolla's got his own network and everything. Kevin Pollak. So yeah, I think, and again, they come with built-in celebrity.
Sure.
And also, I do think that God, Corolla is brilliant because not only selling other people's products, but then he came up with that man grate for your grill to have like the kind of restaurant professional grill on top of your barbecue, and then that mangria, his sangria and stuff. I mean, that's brilliant. But again, that's the thing. He's very entrepreneurial that way. And I also do think, and I'm sure you do as well, that I think the comedians, it's to their advantage because the podcast becomes a commercial for their live show.
Oh, absolutely.
And then, so that's even better. I mean, and that's why I kind of like him, every now and I haven't been able to really put it all together to do a live show. I'm sure in Alaska it's even more difficult. But I mean, being in Chicago, because, there's the Comic Book Club. I think that's what they're still called. They're part of the Nerdist Network, but I knew them when they were independent. They're in New York and they do a live show, and certainly New York has a good number of professionals they can call on locally and everything to come and do a live interview. Chicago's a really great collective of comic book artists and writers, and I'm friends with most of them. But they do so many local store signings that I don't think it's that big of a deal. To put Mike, as much as I love Mike Norton or Tim Seeley, to put them, or Jill Thompson and Annie Wu, to put them on a stage and have them answer questions and stuff. I don't know. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I had Mike on my show not that long ago, and he was saying, he was like, people don't come out to the signings anymore because you see each other in the grocery store. Why would we go to a signing? And it makes sense. But, I want to ask, like, over the 12 years, obviously we've already covered a lot of this, but over the 12 years of your podcasting, how do you feel that the medium of podcasting itself and also your own interview styling, how has that changed the most over those 12 years?
I think I've gotten looser personally.
Sure.
I trust my instincts more. I always say it's best to do one-on-one shows versus even having two different guests, because it will divide your attention. And it's worse with two hosts because you could really be onto something with a creator where, and I always give the simpleton example of, I really got into comic books because it was 2 years after I stopped being a serial killer and I started writing comic books and it was great. And then you go to the next host and it's like, so what's your favorite color? And it's like, no, we want to talk about the serial killer shit. What are you doing? Stop.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be an ass because it's your co-host. And also just coordinating, schedules is nuts too. So, but I always have things I want to talk about. And I used to and I still do. If I'm not as familiar with the creator, I will sit down and have an outline and just have it there as kind of a safety net. But also, as you and I even discussed before we were recording, you said, I've got a couple things I want to talk to you about, but I also want to leave it loose. And yeah, that's the key. That's exactly what you should do. Again, I've had, I had several years of sports radio interviewing to kind of learn, the rhythms of what's going on with, at the time, the team or the athlete, and kind of at least get to know them because I'm covering their stuff day to day, so that it got easier. But also there was that time pressure. So you really had to be like, oh, man, from hearing my few shows and stuff, I mean, I'll go from an hour show or maybe an hour and 10-minute show to a 3-hour show. And the reason why I do that is I feel, especially when it is somebody like Greg Rucka or Brian Bendis, that much as if it were George Lucas, if you told a Star Wars fan, well, I could have had 3 hours with George Lucas, but I know that most people only listen for like a half hour or
Right.
30 minutes. So I'm just going to leave that. Are you nuts? Talk to him for 3 hours. And it's like, yeah, I know. And it's like, no, that's good. And also in the cases of those two particular guys, they have kind of become friends. And some people are like, well, you're a journalist. You shouldn't have that familiarity. I'm like, nah, I'm more Johnny Carson than I am Mike Wallace,
Mm-hmm.
because I kind of don't give a shit. I mean, people like Captain America, Hail Hydra, just really disturbed and upset so many people. I mean, that's common knowledge. And I'm like, well, it wouldn't have been my first choice, but let me see what the story's like. I love the story. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
great. I've got another Nick Spencer interview coming, depending on when this is released, within days of it or whatever. So it's going to be released, if not at the end of this week as we're recording, then early next week. And I don't understand the level of how dare you, because I do actually, and I'm interested in what you think of this, because I've been talking about it on my show recently. DC and Marvel are kind of like the fast foods of comics,
Mm-hmm.
and people come in for a Big Mac or a Whopper,
Right.
and every now and then they'll be excited when the McRib is is available for a while, or something that slightly deviates from the norm. But they pretty much want their meat and potatoes.
Right.
And also, like in the case of Marvel, to take so many older versions of characters off the table at the same time and say, well, if you want to read Iron Man, it's really Riri Williams or you're shit out of luck. It's like, okay, well, what if I mean, I think that's great that there's a black woman as an Iron Man character, but at the expense of a Tony Stark story, then I have a problem. And in fairness, I mean, readers of it know, and Bendis is aware too. Tony's right there. I mean, he's a ghost in the machine right now, but he's still in the book. Or the Odin son is still in Jane Foster's Thor book,
Mm-hmm.
and their story is still very much linked together and stuff. So I get it, but I can appreciate a fan going, I just want to read a Captain America story, and not a Captain America story where he's the bad guy.
Right.
They're imprinting a lot more the Nazism, and they're clearly not reading. And also, well, I guess they might be, because clearly now that we're 3 issues into Secret Empire, it's a Man in the High Castle
Sure.
homage,
Mm-hmm.
and but that's okay. I think that's interesting. I liked when the Skull had the cosmic cube and we had drunk Tony Stark as Iron Man, and irredeemable Iron Man or whatever the hell he was called and shit like that. It's fun for a while. For a while. And the
Yeah.
question is, how long is for a while? Because that's the real problem. Some of this shit just takes too long, and you're like, okay, you've been playing enough. We're kind of missing what we came initially for. Wrap it up.
Yeah, I think it really, a lot of it comes down to what you're talking about, the McDonald's type thing, where comic book readers are routine oriented people. And and this falls down to like the relaunches and the reboots and the renumberings and everything like that too. Anytime you break routines, anytime you break what they know, that is sending signals to their brain that this is wrong. And so whether that means Captain America saying "Hail Hydra," or two unbeatable Squirrel Girls and number ones in 1 year, or whatever, or like even, I mean, remember when New 52 was first announced, some people were really excited and some people were mad, and
Sure.
you're gonna get that because we're in a time where people just have more incendiary. They don't necessarily have more incendiary thoughts, but they have easier avenues to get out there with those incendiary thoughts.
Oh yes.
And so that becomes, you see that because the stuff that is incendiary is naturally going to rise to the top. If I come out and I'm like, to me, here's my Secret Empire take. My Secret Empire take is, I read the Zero issue. It was a very good event comic. And I actually have switched to trades, but I felt like I had to read the Zero issue just because, it's a big event. And so I read the Zero issue, thought it was a very good comic. To me, it just felt kind of wrong given the delivery of the story, given the delivery of the way the Captain America was being presented. I knew as a comic book reader that it would be played out eventually, but I was just like, I'll just end up reading this when it's all done, especially now that it's been expanded to 10 issues. I understand why people are annoyed, but at the same time, it's like, I have a hard time dealing with every issue being life or death. And that's one of the tough parts. I mean, people can be upset if they want, but it's just like, maybe no death threats to Nick Spencer and Tom Brevoort. Maybe don't do that.
Totally. I thought you meant I thought you meant the characters dying.
Oh
But yes,
no.
oh no. Oh God, the level of outrage where they actually have to get security for these guys when they do signings and stuff like that. Please, I'm sorry. There's something wrong with that person.
Yeah.
And truly, and I don't mean that in any mean way, but that's the thing. And like you said, there's no filter to find, or there's no filter to find out if this is a 12-year-old crank. I mean, we don't know who Vader 28 is,
Sure.
but he's got a very loud voice. And I used to say that to a couple specific creators, and that's my go-to. It's like, do not let Vader 28, who doesn't even have the guts to say, my name is, Henry Jones, and I think this is shit.
Right.
It's like, I'm sorry, please. And I've met some of these people. I've seen behind the curtain and seen the great and powerful Oz, and it's not even Frank Morgan. It's, it's even more disappointing. And it's just like, oh, come on, man. And it is even more aggravating to me that there are bloggers and podcasters who kind of sympathize. Yeah, Marvel shouldn't be doing this story. Really? Really? That's interesting because, again, judge it when it's done, and then let's go back and see, or give it that body of time, like I said, where you're like, all right, it's been a year and a half, and 7 of the major Marvel heroes aren't on the chessboard right now because of all these various reasons, all at the same time, and you're wondering why people aren't reading as many comics.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to play devil's advocate, I think it's fine
Sure.
having your own take. However, I think when people get into the position where their take is the only take is where it starts to get rough, because it's like you have to be accepting of other people's opinions. And I mean, and I'm not saying that you should be accepting of horrifically monstrous opinions or something like that. But if it's like, I would like to read this comic, that doesn't make you a supervillain. That just means you want to read this comic. And
well, but again, it's okay to say I don't like this story, I'm not going to read it. But then to go to the further step of, and Marvel shouldn't have even published it in the first place.
Sure.
It's like, sit down, Charlie. All right, relax.
Yeah, no, it is really odd. And like, going back to like the death threats thing,
Yes.
I know you don't follow basketball. We talked about before we started recording, you don't follow basketball a lot, but there was recently in the Western Conference Finals, this player, the center for the Golden State Warriors, Zaza Pachulia, either intentionally or accidentally injured the Spurs' best player by putting his foot underneath the best player's foot when he landed, spraining his ankle. And so after that happened, they actually had to put security with at the guy's school or children's schools, because they were worried that something was going to go wrong, like their kids were going to be attacked because of this.
Hey, yeah, man. I know that at Wrigley Field there were fans that had the gall to go on the field and start yelling and throwing punches at players and stuff. No, it's not just comics. It's hey, everything's ratcheted up, and that happened well before the 2016 election. I mean, no, yeah, but it is partially, I think, because of this current era of content and your own thoughts being reinforced in every avenue of online. You'll find a blog that agrees with you, or a podcast, or a vlog, or something. And yeah, and it might embolden the wrong people,
right,
to really, put themselves in the game. But that's the thing. It's like, okay, you're the audience. You have a choice of not liking or liking and not supporting with your money. That's fine. But to go that step further, it's like, I'm sorry, that's wrong. And and those people really need to be pointed out and saying, yeah, that's bad behavior. You are not part of the game. Again, I like. It's like I said about podcasting. It's the best and worst thing about podcasting. Anyone can get on social media and say their piece, but you would hope for some sort of self-responsibility.
I do find it funny that we have this like glorious utopia device where like the internet is connecting everyone and we use it to be assholes to each other. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't know. I mean, I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska. I didn't have a comic book friend until I was 24.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was like kind of always on this island. So I still think the internet. I'm like the innocent child who was basically I came out of one of the tubes in the Matrix where I was like, what is this world? This food is amazing. It's
So
gruel.
Were there comic stores in Anchorage, or how were you getting your comics?
Yeah, no. Anchorage had at times anywhere between 1 and 4 comic book shops. And basically, Bosco's Comics is the one that kind of governs. They're like the big one, the one that remains.
Okay.
And it's a great shop. I've been shopping there since I was a little kid. You know, there are some things that I wish they would change, like maybe order more Volume 1 trades of Image Comics, because it just seems like it makes sense, because they always sell out immediately because they only order one. But you know, we always had a shop to go to, and so like that was kind of I would hang out there, and I would like sit, and I was one of those horrible kids that would sit in front of the racks, and I would read all the comics and everything like that. And you know, so I had that, but I never really had friendships with people who read comics. So you know, I started out writing for Multiversity Comics, and I made friends with people off of this forum for like, actually, of all things, a punk music forum. And we started this comic book thread, and then myself and 2 other people who were on that thread ended up starting up I didn't start it up. It was one guy started up Multiversity Comics, and I was one of the first people who was there. And you know, it was funny because it came from that, and we ended up getting nominated for an Eisner Award, which was kind of hilarious. But you know, it's I don't know. I still look at the internet with wonder, because I see a lot of great things that come with it too. It's just
absolutely,
it's crazy. But you know, I want to get back to the podcast stuff. One of the things that I really love about what you do, I know, like, you know, people sass you probably for the fact that you're like BFFs with some of these people, so to speak, but it does allow you to go to a lot of personal places. Like one episode I really liked with you was the December episode with Tom King, where you guys talked about a death in his family and how that impacted him near the beginning of the podcast. And I thought that was amazing. Like, that's stuff that we don't get to hear elsewhere. There's only so many times you can read the fact that Batman's going to fight X or whatever, or maybe Kite Man's going to do funny things. But you really don't get that elsewhere. Is that a goal when you dive into these interviews, to like kind of tap into that more personal side and kind of reveal more about who they are as humans?
As much as they want to reveal about themselves. And honestly, sometimes I'm surprised, because I almost feel like a bartender. And it's funny because, the BFF thing. I sometimes wonder, am I the Gayle King of comics? I'm Oprah's friend. I'm Oprah's friend. Hi, how are you? But no, you know, and sometimes people will get really intense, and I'm like, hey, man, you know, I appreciate your level of trust. And I don't know if it's just because it's something they really need to express. Obviously, that's the case. But I do say, hey, you know, we can keep it light. If you suddenly went down a corridor that you don't want to go down,
sure,
I'm happy to take that out, because I don't want to screw up their marketing, and I also don't want to screw. This is a very tightrope time in terms of expressing your opinions or your personal life, and I have stepped, I think, sometimes in the wrong direction. And I certainly, the message board me of 10 or 12 or even longer years ago on the internet is not the same me. I definitely keep my thoughts closer to the vest. There are some things like Hail Hydra where I do think, okay, I disagree with that reaction. But I do think in this time of more sexual awareness and demands for representation, which I completely back, I think that sometimes, you know, again, there's a cause. They wanted James Gunn removed from Guardians of the Galaxy before the first movie came out, because around the time he made Super, he did a list of the 50 superheroes and villains he'd like to fuck on his blog. And it was totally, you know, Comedy Central roast kind of material.
Sure.
And some of it did get it crossed that line of, well, I'm a bisexual person, I find that offensive. I am a person of color, and I find that offensive. And it wasn't any like trigger words per se, but they were just fast little like jabs and stuff. And it was like, okay, this guy needs to be removed from this movie right now because he said these horrible things, and Disney should not stand for it. And it's like, okay, first of all, he said it 5 years ago, and you that just drives me nuts. And secondly, it's like, can you see? It's kind of like as George Carlin said it when he made fun of the fact that on the news they put Mickey Mouse's birthday, and he's like, how about I say this? I hope Mickey dies. He's like, I hope Mickey's found in a crack house dead with his hand down Goofy's pants. So do we all owe the estate of Walt Disney an apology now for, you know, characterizing Mickey Mouse in that sort of way, or putting Sherlock Holmes in women's underwear? Does the estate of Arthur Conan Doyle deserve an apology or something? Like, it's like, I'm like, you know, I don't know. I just, when that stuff happens, it's like, okay. So I don't know. That was a tangent. I
Well,
don't even
no,
know
no.
what
I
you were
mean,
talking.
I know what you're saying. It's like there's a certain point where I'm not going to name names, but I mean, I've had people on my podcast who don't necessarily want to show or share their actual thoughts because they don't. Not even because of controversial things. They just don't want to get in trouble with employers or anybody like that,
Sure,
and that's
absolutely.
understandable. But no, I mean, I do like the fact that like that story with Tom. I mean, I think one of
Yes,
the things that makes social media and the internet amazing is because I feel like we're in a time, especially in comics, where creator owned is super relevant and personalities sell almost as much as the work does at times.
absolutely.
Like it's a great differentiator. Like if I find somebody who I like, let's say I listen to your podcast and I listen to Tom and I'm like, wow, this guy, he's a real guy. He's not only a good writer, but he's a real guy. That
Yep,
means I'm more likely to probably buy his books going forward because I have that extra little push. And I do think
absolutely.
that there's, especially given the dearth of interviews out there that actually dive into kind of more personal elements and talking about who people are
Yeah.
and not just the same old promotional rigmarole. Like I think that there's a lot of value there.
Oh, I agree, and you're right, and thank you for getting me back on track. Because yeah, if they're willing to reveal that about themselves, that's wonderful. And what my goal really is to get beyond the hype and say what inspires you, what is part of you, what things are part of the collective experience that you have that comes through in your work or your attitudes towards what you're doing. Because yeah, I think the comic book has evolved. We've always had great comic books and great comic books for adults, but I think we have more than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting to find out what inspires these people.
Right.
So that's really what I'm going for. And if they want to add on to that some of the tough things that they've done, that's great because you're right. I think people not only get excited and say, "Well, geez, I'm into jazz too.
Yeah.
I like this," or "I'm into old movies." That's awesome, and that's something else I could talk about to that guy when I see him at a convention or a signing. But also, God, somebody close to me killed themselves or
Mm-hmm.
has had a bad drug addiction, and it's man, I'm hearing how they cope with it and everything, and that's helping me cope with it. That's wonderful, and I'm happy to be the facilitator for people to get that connection, and that the creators have that kind of trust in me.
Sure.
So I mean, truly, it's an honor, and I don't take it lightly, and I thank them for their candor, and I always say that when I feel like not only when they're talking personally about themselves, but stuff that they don't like about the business, because again, like you said, I don't want these guys to get in trouble with that'll fuck up their paycheck.
Right.
I mean, that's okay. I mean, we're it's tough again writing for the big two. I think there are a lot of rules, and I think a lot of things as far as edgy things that they'd like the heroes and villains to do. There's just too many diverse opinions, and I mean, it's frustrating when it feels like we're regressing in terms of our social accepted norms and things rather than advancing.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that ultimately, still, this is commercial art. These aren't being made to be sold. So I do think it kind of ties their hands in terms of what kind of story they can tell when it's on Warner Brothers' dime or Disney's dime.
Right. As the self, and I'm using your words as the self-described Gale of the comic book interview world. Do you feel like do you feel like you kind of are protective of your guests to a certain degree?
No, no, because no, and maybe because no bad story offends me to the point. If I don't want to, if I don't like a story, I don't read it,
Right.
and
No,
I'm not
I
interested in
meant more
talking.
like in the sense that like let's say somebody
Like if
was
they're shitting on Bendis, I feel like I should defend Bendis.
no, I mean it's like somebody comes on the show and starts going in a different direction. Like would you try to okay, so let's say I don't know, a creator X comes on your show and it starts going in a direction that you think it might not be good. Do you feel like you try to go in a different direction? Particularly if, sorry, this is
Well,
a very poorly formed question, but
I'll reveal something. About 10 years ago, there was a real negative reaction to a couple things that Marvel did with a couple of their main characters, and I got to keep it blank
vague.
because I don't vague because I don't want to out the creator at the time. But this guy was really mad and was ready to take on the world, and it's time that enough. I am angry at this news web. They were mad at Newsarama at the time
Mhm.
because it was involving Newsarama, and I always say Rama, and they get mad at me, so it's Rama. It's my Chicago accent, but and just vitriol. This reporter is wrong, and these people are wrong, and just let us tell our story. And it was just bile. And I'm like, dude, I don't want you to have to answer to a couple hundred Vader 28s for the next 3 weeks because of what you're saying. No, I don't care. I want this out there. I'm like, all right, I'll tell you what. Let's wait a day. I go, you know something? You have a bunch of friends that you see all the time. Play it for one of them. I go, I'm sending it to you right now. You just play it. And I go, or even just think about it for 24 hours. And if you really want me to put it out, I'll put it out. I
Sure.
said, but I just think your anger is really clouding over, and it's just going to hurt you more than help you, because I'm not, and forgive me, because I respect most of what he does, but I'm not Rich Johnson. And I do think Rich sometimes, and Bleeding Cool, the rules of journalism in England are different than American rules. A lot of times, and this is blanket, and I'm not saying specifically Rich in any instance that I know, but I do know that sometimes, and actually I do know at one point, I only had one source on a story, and I wasn't sure if I should run with it or not. And I'm like, hey, Rich, have you heard about this? Totally different than what I'm explaining. By the way, let me finish the first story. So the creator, took a day, and he's like, you're right, let's not
Sure.
release it. I'm like, okay. And seriously, ever since then, he's like, I can't thank you enough. And I'm like, dude, I'm not here to fuck up your career.
Right.
I'm here to get an entertaining conversation where people get to know more about you and what inspires you, not what angers you. Please, that's easy. That's cheap.
Right. And you're not trying to capitalize on somebody's future misery, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, man, because no, I like Word Balloon to be this living body of this is what, and it really, if you go back to 2005 when I started and up till 2017, I feel like I'm providing this kind of oral history and informal small J journalism history of comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I want these people to feel like they've got a place where they're not going to get gotcha'd and stuff. So, but yeah, I mean, so that's really my basic thing. And I'm just like, look, I don't need to be first with a story. I don't need to break news or anything like. I just want a good conversation. And I mean, I have had people on where an event didn't go as they had hoped or the company had hoped, and I want to know, well, what do you think went wrong? And not in any sort of gotcha way, but really, let's examine this, and where do you think it got away from you or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that fits the oral history of what you're trying to do, but it is really interesting. Just how to handle all these things, because there are so many different ways. And one thing, you were bringing up Rich Johnson there a little bit ago, I did want to mention that he himself doesn't call himself a journalist. He is 100% against that. Like I had him on my show just because
so what is he?
I don't know. I think
it's been a long time since I've had him on the show. So yeah, you go on.
I feel like he might have called himself. I don't think he called himself a performer, but I think it was something closer to that than journalist. That's not his intent. Like I respect what Rich does. Rich does, to be totally honest, because there's a place for somebody like him. And another thing that I like about him is he actually owns what he is. He's not trying to pretend that he's something that he isn't.
That's true. But again, if he can't categorize it, that's interesting. Go on.
Well, yeah, I mean, he just categorizes it as not journalism, I guess. But at the same time, I wouldn't do things the way he does, because sure, there's things that I've heard that I could, run with and probably get some traffic to my podcast or something that I'm writing or something like that. But that doesn't mean I don't want to like ruin somebody for the purpose of, getting a few more hits, so to speak.
Right. And also some of his, hey, we had it first. It's like, yeah, you had it first because everyone got the same press release with the idea of, okay, there's a 5-day embargo of the information we're giving you now. We just want to give you a chance to at least write some stories and figure out what you want to ask us when we do go live. And Rich is like, well, I'm hearing things that there might be a new Titans spinoff.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
It's like, and it's like, give me a break. Come on, man. And or there's that other kind that frankly is being done certainly today in politics and other things where it's like, all right, look, I have this information. You've got two options. You either work with me and we put it out in a way that you're satisfied, or I'm just going to run with it anyway. And a lot of times it is, oh, yeah, by the way, Final Crisis, guess what? Batman shoots Darkseid, he misses, and then Darkseid kills Batman.
Mm-hmm.
A month before it happens, and it's like, well, fuck you. What about the people that actually want to just read the goddamn story?
Yeah.
And I mean, I know we're in a spoiler era where people love spoilers, and they would much rather hear that Darth Vader is Luke's father, months before the movie comes out. I don't know, man. I guess that's where I'm old fashioned. I'm just like, I like being surprised by stories.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a huge challenge to the big two, and in some cases, image creators as well. And I feel for them. And it's like, I just think that's stupid. I think you're screwing yourself out of being entertained by the thing you buy each week. And it's a question of, like you said, is it more the ritual than actually being surprised by the stories? And it's tough to be surprised by stories these days.
Right.
And every comic book death is cheaper by the dozen now because they happen all the time. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I just feel like spoiling is just shitty.
Yeah. I agree. Well, I mean, one of the things I find to be a very odd trend in the way comic book websites operate is like there are major websites that just post recaps of what happened in the comic with like pictures and everything, and they just post that's just content. And I'm like, that's like on the same day it's released. I'm like, that's not anything. That's just like the comic in text form. And yeah. I don't know. I mean, it is interesting. I think that there's an odd like dichotomy in there. There's like some people who like to maintain relationships and there's some people who don't. And I think that there's value in both of those things, but at the same time, like I totally understand why you would want to maintain relationships. You have, I mean, to get back to a direction I want to go in, like you have regulars, like you have people that come on the show over and over. You have Brian Michael Bendis, yes. You have, Dan Slott comes on, Nick Spencer, Kelly Sue DeConnick,
Kelly, absolutely.
That's yeah, I mean, you've had a lot of people over the years. How do you feel like that changes your interview dynamics? And do you try to keep that regulars list limited at all so you can kind of touch on a more diverse list of creators?
No, if I had the wherewithal and to spend more and be able to read more and also spend more time making these things, I'd have Word Balloon be a 5-day-a-week show, and I would have, I mean, God, I just had Paul Cornell back, and I've had him on the show several times. But I missed his Dark Horse, That Damn Band story, which I thought was great. And luckily I got him on for Saucer Country that starts actually tomorrow as we're recording on Wednesday. It'll be the first issue will be out from IDW. No, I think it's because, as you said, the conversations become richer because then it's like, okay, we'll spend about 10 or 20 minutes maybe promoting the new product. Mm-hmm. But then, all right, what's going on? What have you been reading? What have you been watching? What excites you right now? Mm-hmm. And also several of these people are starting to get more interesting opportunities beyond comics. Kelly Sue is a prime example of that, doing a lot of television writing. And Brian is, developing another television show. And Bendis was great, giving me the entire experience of Powers from, okay, it's finally greenlit. We got a series. We've done 2 seasons. It's not running anymore. Okay, so what was that like? And then there are some guys that, God, I love them and I miss them. Kirkman hasn't been on for, about 8 years or so. And when I see him at Comic-Con, he's incredibly generous and nice. And I really should just be like, dude, let's try and set up a time. But I also know he's busy doing his TV stuff, and it's like, all right, eventually I'll get him back. There'll be a forum at some point. Mm-hmm. Jeff Johns is another guy like that. He's so ridiculously busy, literally deciding everything. I've talked to creators who've gone in with meetings with him, and they're there to talk about a comic book, and there are toy people in there, and he's getting calls about movies while the discussion is going on. So I get it when it's like, I really don't have a lot of time, and it's like, no problem. Okay, mm-hmm. That's okay. But, eventually they'll come back. But the ones that do, they like the forum. They like being able to talk about this stuff. And, again, I hope that my experience in interviewing, we have more to talk about than somebody that's doing this for the first time and is literally nervous with every question they're asking, mm-hmm. and hasn't figured out how the flow of a conversation needs to go to be entertaining and, just be more confident. And again, I had the misfortune of having that struggle on the air on radio with, major Chicago athletes and owners and people like that. And it was almost the Chris Farley show sometimes with those guys in my early years. I'm not proud of those early air checks and stuff. But, you take your lumps, you get through it. And, it's funny, as I was leaving sports radio, that's when I really finally started feeling really comfortable and could, challenge Oscar De La Hoya's promoters and say, hey, you're charging pay-per-view for what really should be at the least an HBO fight, because this is a showcase fight. You're not going to lose this fight. So why are you charging people $50 to watch you exercise for your next fight, which is really going to be the big challenge? And, I said that to Oscar De La Hoya about a fight that he had with, I want to say it was Sugar Boy Malinga, an old junior middleweight that was well past his prime. Oh, no, I think this is going to be a very competitive fight. I'm like, yeah, I don't see it, Oscar, but good luck. And, enjoy cashing the check, I guess, whatever. And not that nasty to him, but also letting listeners know, you're not fooling me, man. And I mean, that's when there are times when I think I become like, public advocate and everything. Like, wait a minute, this is wrong.
Right.
And it happens very little in comics. Like I said, I guess the Hail Hydra reaction just really offended me it offended me more in terms of, like I said, don't tell that story. You shouldn't even be telling that story. And it's like, shut up.
I do think that, like, for somebody like you're your own personality, and it's like what you say represents who you are, and it's like your brand. I hate saying that. That's one of my least favorite things about 2017 is like it's all about personal branding and all this stuff like that. I'm just like, I really it's just you being you, right? Isn't that it?
You hope so. And I mean, I guess it depends on the person. It depends on whatever persona they choose to represent as their brand. I see it as an opportunity. This is where Joe's Pizza can compete with Domino's.
Yeah.
And be like, hey, and that's why I'm such a big net neutrality fan, where it's like, oh, fuck you for trying to like cut a deal with Sears.
Right.
And their shit's going to download, their pages are going to download faster, or Netflix is going to download faster instead of the guy that just made his home movie that, might be amazing, but because he's not a big time corporation, it's going to take you longer to download that. Oh, fuck you. I don't want that to happen at all. And shame on the powers at the FCC that think that's a great idea. It's like, no, that's wrong, man. And that's where I think it's cool to be able to, like I said, I've created Word Balloon, and it's, and you're right. Word Balloon represents my opinions and my point of view. But so that's how I look at branding, as more of an opportunity for the little guy to compete with the big corporations.
I do think it's, speaking to what we talked about earlier, there's a proliferation of so many podcasts, but one of the nice things is it gives, everyone can find, like, there is a good side. There's a yang to the yin earlier of what you were saying about how, people have their echo chambers and like they only find the ones that they want to listen to. But the thing is like, somebody might want to listen to you where you have these familiar conversations with people like, Rucka or Bendis or whomever. And on my show, I think I've had 6 people on the show multiple times in the first 100-ish episodes. The dark secret of my 100th episode was actually my 105th episode, but I'm not telling anybody that. But anyways, but like I like to try to have like as many different people as I can on my show. Like I had a comic lawyer on my show. I had people who work in sales, like Corey Murphy from Image. Like she was really interesting because she works in sales, and I got to get all this perspective that I wouldn't otherwise. Brian Hibbs, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like there's different strokes for different folks, and in 2017, there's so many different options. So if you don't find the right version of an interview comic book show for you, good news. There's a lot of other ones.
Oh, totally. And I wish there were more interview shows as opposed to and forgive me, this is another one of my pet peeves. Hey, we're all friends and we're going to talk about comics and we're going to do it while we're drinking.
How dare
man, you guys are radical. Man, you guys are just rebels. Ooh, give me a break.
That is a very sick burn because I did that once. How dare you? How dare you, John?
Hey, man. Hey, 11 o'clock comics. They're my friends, but that's a big part of their show. Okay, what's everybody drinking tonight? Woo-hoo. And it's like, okay, if you think that makes it more fun, that's fine. It's fine. It's like, well, you are at home drinking. You're not driving a car while you're drinking. So if you think it's being that radical, drinking while you're broadcasting or podcasting, it's like, all right, whatever. I'm not. I don't know. I mean, I'll confess to some having smoked reefer before doing a college radio show. I mean, I didn't go on there and go, hey, everybody, I'm blitzed. How you doing?
That would be.
But that's the thing. It's
a
like
bold choice.
Yeah, well, and again, because honestly, I think for a lot of people doing podcasts, and you're someone who had a college radio show as well, I think it's like their version of college radio.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big believer in Malcolm Gladwell too. You need to get your 10,000 hours in before you really know how to do something. And it's hey, so really, I mean, podcasting, I still, I mean, I'm not at my 1,000. I'm only in around, I think I'm around 800. I gotta count because I really don't know. I do account for a while, and then I forget about it, and then suddenly I realize it's been 50 episodes since I've put a number on anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm either in the mid 700s or I'm close to 800. And again, I don't count that first 50 or so that I did in 2005 up till September of 06 from the old. I mean, some of them made it over to the new feed. A lot of them were my, kind of like you said, that you have actually 105 episodes and you're
yeah.
counting 100 and everything. So, I mean, I had a couple that I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I need to really bring that one back necessarily or not. And some are stuck on a desktop that I really need to crack open and, get all the actual files out of and stuff like that. So, but, no, I enjoy, I like what I do. I mean, I'm cool with, I'm content with the way I do things. And, I sleep very easy.
Yeah. Well, I just have a few more questions before diving into my 5 questions about the 12-year history of Word Balloon. In the last few ones are about kind of promotion. I wanted to ask about what it was like when you were first getting started. I heard in one of your podcasts that the Bendis boards were a big part of you developing your audience.
No question.
How did you? What's that?
No question.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how did you get the word out on your show, and how slow of a process was it back in the day? Do you think it was easier when there wasn't so much competition, or do you think that because there were less options that it was a little bit more difficult?
I think it probably was easier because, as I said, there really were like only around 10 or 15 comic book podcasts, and also so few of them were doing interviews. And I would go directly to the creator's website where they likely had a message board or a forum where they all were together. I can't remember the one forum where it was Jeff Johns, Greg Rucka, Gail Simone, Ed Brubaker. It might have been at Speakeasy or whatever, their forums, or I can't even remember now. Again, this is way back. And the Bendis board was great because Bendis was there, Oming was there, Brubaker was, or not Brubaker, Fraction was there. And this is Fraction, Five Fists of Science, stuff like that, and Last of the Independents, his very early stuff. And again, so I would go to their websites or go to those forums. I'd go to the CBR forums and, like, okay, you guys are talking about Greg Rucka and Queen of Country. Well, if you didn't know, I just did an interview with him. Here's the link. And, it was Johnny Appleseed, man. And I truly, that's why I'm very proud of my audience. It's not as gigantic of an audience as people may think. It is a very dedicated audience, though, that also responds with, hey, that person sounded cool. Let me try out their stuff. And I do want to point out, too, that I do still have, obviously, first-timers on Word Balloon and new books. And David Prepos did that Spencer and Locke book for Action Labs, and I thought that was a really fun book. And so I was happy to have him on for, and talk to him for the first time. So yeah, and I still am pursuing new people, and I'm trying to do also find people that are even just doing digital stuff, haven't found that publisher yet to make their idea happen. But and then also I do get requests from people, and sometimes they're first time books, and the art isn't right. It's just it's a first book, and you got to make a couple first books before you can start making good books, and I get that, but it's like, well, with respect, because I give them credit. And not that I'm anybody. Let me put that in the front. But then they come and go, hey, can I be on your podcast? And it's like, no, because you're not ready. It's like, keep doing what you're doing and get better at it. But right now I'm going to have to take a pass and say, yeah, I'm not really interested. I'm kind of I want people that have books that that are being published or even self-published, but have a level of quality to them that it's like, no, more people need to know about this. I mean, I'm happy to support the occasional Kickstarter. But again, it's got to really be something distinct. And if you're telling me that your zombie book is, the greatest idea, I'll tell you right now, I mean, Walking Dead is such an exception for me when it comes to zombie stories. I mostly hate zombie. I mean, I really, when Chris Robertson and now I'm blanking,
Allred.
but thank you, Mike Allred did iZombie. Exactly. I'm like, hey, great, another zombie thing. Okay. But I'm so happy for them that it obviously has became a TV show and everything, and that's great. And and I love Chris, and I haven't had All Red on yet, but man, I'm such a fan of his. He's
He
so
is
great.
so nice. Like I interviewed him back when I was at, or my friend and I interviewed him back when I was at Multiversity, and he was like
Cool.
such a generous and kind dude. I mean,
That's
he
what I
was
keep
just
hearing.
great. Well, I want to ask one other question about like growing your
Sure.
listener base. Once upon a time, Word Balloon was it that wasn't hosted at, but it was posted at Newsarama.
Yes.
Um, how big of a lift do you think that was? Do you
Oh, it
think
helped a lot.
it did?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And that was back when Matt Brady and Mike Doran, it was theirs. It was before it was right before they got bought out by the same company that had space.com and a few other websites and stuff. And I was at a crossroads, and it really would have either been going to Newsarama or also Jonah Weiland and CBR.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually asked a few creators, what do you think? And the consensus was, well, they're both great, and it's really hard to choose. But right now, I'm thinking Newsarama. And I'm like, all right.
Mm-hmm.
So I did, and it was great. And then iFanboy, they suddenly got financial backing and are like, hey, would you be interested in, bringing your show to us? And I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, fine. So I did, because it was a little more money and it was more consistent money.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, all right, let me do that for a while. And then their backing started to dry up, and I wasn't, getting regular money anymore. And I'm like, well, something, guys, no offense, but I'm, going to do my own thing and worry about, getting my own sponsors and doing that. In the case of Newsarama, it was definitely exposure. In the case of iFanboy, it was the hope that, okay, I've built this into something, and you guys are talking about getting more advertising and stuff, and that you will include me in these advertising buys. And they did. And then those dried up, and their backing changed. The site reverted back to them, iFanboy and
Mm-hmm.
everything. And, they just weren't in a financial position to continue the relationship. And I'm like, well, then, not to be crass, but I'm like, I can make money on my own. Thank you. I'll see you guys later.
Mm-hmm.
And haven't regretted that. And I'm kind of, I wouldn't say I'm a whore, but I, if the right networking situation was, presented itself, I would consider it. But I am also leery because, as we were saying, all those guys seem to go to the same well of MeUndies and all that. And I
Mm-hmm.
know some people that have shows on these bigger networks, not the Chris Hardwicks, but they are shows under that banner and stuff. They're not making that much money, and I'm like, well, I can make more on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And I would rather this be its own thing. And also, when the time comes, should an opportunity present itself on another platform to do something based. I mean, I got Prophets of Science Fiction, that Science Channel TV show. They had me as a talking head because of Word Balloon,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a nice shot in the arm, and also internationally, because that thing really did play around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, when those opportunities come up, I want to be able to handle them perfectly and not worry about, someone's ego saying, well, instead of talking to John, why don't you talk to me? And it's like, that's okay. So I'm just kind of watching out for that stuff. But yeah, definitely. No, Bendis Board was a huge thing at the very beginning because of his fandom and everything. And yeah, Newsarama was absolutely a very big and very helpful association.
Mm-hmm. I do think that the money thing is interesting because it's like, for a long time I didn't make money earning or doing any of this, and then once I started making money, it's like once you start that, it's hard to go back. It's like you want to keep you want to move forward, you want to progress, you want to keep making more money. And one of the I'm very impressed by what you do because you have sponsors, you have a Patreon, and also I love the fact you have your League of Word Balloon listeners that donate to you via PayPal. Actually, that's just all of your
Well,
listeners, right?
that's also Patreon though too.
Oh yeah,
I refer to the Patreon people as part of that. That was just a clever. I thought a cute alliteration
sure.
of calling them something and everything. And truly, I'm incredibly grateful to their generosity and that they believe in what I'm doing and are like, no, we do want you to make more of this
Mm-hmm.
if it's possible. And that's really, really nice. And especially this year, I got let go of my last full-time radio job that I had for 9 years at the end of the year last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I am looking for full-time broadcasting employment, but also trying to push Word Balloon ahead as well. So yeah, the League of Word Balloon listeners, they're very wonderful with their support. And when I meet them at conventions, I feel like I'm running for mayor, but it's the truth. I shake their hand, I thank them, I find out who they are and everything, and can't thank them enough face to face and tell them how much I truly appreciate their patronage. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really huge. But yeah, I mean, I also God, if like the ship were ever to come in, I would stop all of that immediately and be like, well, no, that's okay. Disney's paying for me right now, or whatever
Right.
Lionsgate or whatever big conglomerate decided, hey, Word Balloon might be fun to do or whatever. I would absolutely, because I'd like consumers to enjoy the content and support the products that are the sponsors and stuff like that, and have that be enough, rather than if I mean, I appreciate that they are willing to help me support it, but I do feel guilty and kind of old school where it's like, yeah, you guys really, in a perfect world, there'd be enough sponsors where I wouldn't have to feel like that extra obligation, unless it was a
Sure.
product that I was generating beyond the show. But I do think the show is a product itself.
It is.
So
Yeah.
there's my tug of war.
So you're saying Word Balloon is sugar daddy flexible?
I guess I am a whore at the end of the day. No, yeah, where I'm coming from.
Oh
Man.
no,
But
totally.
yeah,
Yeah, seriously.
but I do. I'm grateful for the support, and like I said, I would rather be a Kevin Smith than someone that had to rely on the patronage. Although they do it too.
Yeah, they do.
So
It's extra
there's
income.
that as well. Because honestly, I got a little shit from some of my fellow older podcasts, like, how dare you ask for money? And it's like, I don't think I'm not demanding money, and I'm not holding the show up for ransom where I'm saying pay me or fuck you, the show's ending, or anything like that. So, yeah, and it's very interesting because those same people now, they're like, well, how do you do this Patreon thing? I'm like, hey, go fuck yourself and find out for yourself.
Oh man, yeah, no,
I can't be vindictive.
I feel you. I feel you. I mean, it is. It's a new world, and I kind of feel like we're all figuring it out together. But
Absolutely.
I'm impressed by how you've done it. Like I joked on Twitter today that I'm actually just having you on my show just so I can steal all of your powers and I can become you. So in your face, John Siuntres, I'm taking your powers.
Son of a bitch! I told him the secret recipe. God damn it! What was wrong with me?
So I want to close the show with a lightning round of 5 questions.
Okay, man.
Roughly about your 12 years in the show, and I know you've answered all these questions a million times, but I'm asking you a million first times. So I wanted to ask, you said you don't really get nervous anymore. When was the last time you had a guest, not just in comics? I mean, obviously it's not Oscar De La Hoya, but I mean, when was the last time you were actually nervous in the build-up to an interview?
I'll tell you, Tony Hendra, who I had on in October, who you don't know by name, but if you know, this is Spinal Tap. He was
Oh,
Spinal Tap's manager with the cricket bat.
oh my God, that's awesome.
Do you know his whole pedigree and everything?
No.
He was one of the founding, or if not founding, in the first couple of years, writers and editors in National Lampoon magazine. He was one of the driving forces of the National Lampoon Radio Hour, which was a precursor of Saturday Night Live. It had Gilda Radner and John Belushi and
That's
Bill and
awesome.
Brian Doyle Murray. He made the puppet show Spinning Image in the 80s, where, if you remember the Genesis video, Land of Confusion, they have a Reagan puppet and all these celebrity puppets. He's just this brilliant comedy mind, and was classmates with the Pythons at Cambridge. And God, I mean, I was so excited and nervous talking to him. We had a really bad connection, and I didn't care, and I still went ahead. We tried a couple times, and it was still the same, and I still went ahead with the interview. And listening to him, it sounds like he's on shortwave, and I really haven't had a sound quality issue like that for really a long time. But I didn't care because I knew the content was great, and I was just so proud having him on. And he was like, "Oh, that's a good question." He had various things that I would ask him, and he's like, "Wow, you really do know my stuff." And I'm like, "Dude, I was that little brother sneaking National Lampoons from my older brother and laughing at all that stuff you guys were writing, and the records, the comedy records they made." He's a genius. He's a comedy genius. And it was awesome because a few weeks after doing it, not to name drop, but here we go. I was at New York Comic Con, and Dave Gibbons, who is, like, that's another guy that I'm slightly nervous when I talk to him, but I really appreciate his listening, and he's like, "John, I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but I see that you talked to Tony Hendra. I was best friends with his younger brother." And I'm just like, the whole time, like, Dave Gibbons likes
Right.
me, and he always manages to, he wants to see me and tell me, share something with me, and I'm like, that's insane. And truly, as far as contemporary creators, although he's certainly a grandmaster in the grandmaster category, but yeah, Dave. Anytime I talk to Dave Gibbons, I'm a little nervous, and also just so excited that I can't believe that he's coming back and talking to me again. I really have so much respect and admiration for that guy.
I honestly, I mean, I don't really get nervous.
Long answer to a lightning round question.
No, it's okay. I don't really get that nervous anymore, but I hope I never stop feeling the thrill when somebody is like, says something nice about my show that like I've respected for a really long time. I remember one time I had like this crazy run-in with Greg Capullo at New York Comic Con where my buddy and I, who used to do this video show, he came on. I think I probably told this show on the podcast before, but we were at New York Comic Con. We were staying in this weird hotel, Yotel, and we were coming out of out of Yotel. Yeah, we were coming out of the elevator.
Japanese place. Go on.
we were coming out of the elevator, and there was like this deluge of people because the con just ended. And so my buddy and I, we wander past this huge crowd, and all of a sudden we hear, "Hey, you guys!" And like we turn around because we're thinking it's us, and like this dude, this like guy who looks like a roadie from Motorhead pops out, and he's like, "You guys are the guys from the YouTube," and we're like, "Oh my god." Oh, and you could just tell that both of us are worried we're about to get murdered by someone who's seen our show and didn't like what we had to say. And he's like, and he points at my friend. He's like, "I'm Greg Capullo, and you always have such nice things to say about my work." And then he points at me and he's like, "And you're coming around too." And he shakes both of our hands and runs away. And we're like, "What just happened?"
I understand. I've had that same situation. And like you said too, yeah, it's ridiculously gratifying when the creators say, "I like doing your show because ... And it's like, wow,
right.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Next question. If you weren't podcasting about comics, what would you want to cover?
Boxing. Probably boxing. Because and it's funny because there was, as I was telling you, I think off the air, there was a period in boxing when the Klitschkos were sharing the title and just there really wasn't that much interesting happening south of 140 pounds. That it was really tough to be a boxing fan. And also just both HBO and Showtime just weren't picking great fighters to follow and stuff. And more was happening in Europe. But I would have to say in the last couple of years, my interest in boxing has picked up again. And again, if I was in that situation where I was making enough money to really call my own shots each day, I would be doing a boxing podcast alongside the comic book stuff right now. And not only about the current stuff, but the history of boxing fascinates me, and especially where it is now, because we talked about this again off the air. I really think the CTE injuries that we're now discovering in football players are very likely happening to boxers as well. And I do fear for the sport for its longevity. And I honestly don't know how long society will allow this kind of barbarism to last. But there is part of me that still also appreciates the drama of an amazing fight. And as I told you, the Anthony Joshua Vladimir Klitschko fight from a few weeks ago, that heavyweight fight, that's as great of a heavyweight fight. I mean, you can literally put that alongside all the great fights from Ali Frazier and truly, I mean, it's an epic heavyweight fight that deserves to be in the discussion of any great heavyweight championship fight. So it'd be boxing.
So related to that, you used to be in sports broadcasting, which we talked about. But, comics and sports quite often have like a weirdly adversarial relationship outside of wrestling. People love wrestling, which makes sense. But that said, would you ever have a sports guest on Word Balloon? And if you did, would they have to be tangentially related to comics?
No, I had Jeremy Roenick, the former NHL great, and it was really, really brief, but it was really funny. At my last job, I have friends who do sports podcasting, and this friend in New York is like, "Hey, JR is in Chicago. He needs to record his podcast at his studio. Could he come to your radio studio and do it this afternoon?" I said, "And can you like babysit it?" He goes, "He'll have all the equipment with him, but just in case something goes wrong, can we use your phone equipment at the station?" I'm like, "Yeah, no problem." So we did it, and it was great seeing Jeremy. And Jeremy was with the Blackhawks for years.
Yeah.
Early in his career and stuff. He didn't remember me. I didn't expect him to, but I, certainly was around him a lot in his early career. So it was fun watching him do it. And he's like, "Hey man, can I do anything else for you?" I'm like, "You got an extra 10 minutes? He goes, "Yeah." I go, "Sit down. Let's talk about any geek shit you like." And he wasn't a comic book guy, but he likes the Star Wars movies and likes geek culture films and stuff. So we had this great 10-minute conversation. So that was fun. Also, Israel Adonijah, the former Bear.
Yeah.
He's
Athletic
been dabbling
right?
in comics. Absolutely. And so it was fun talking to him. It's fun to discover the sport people that do love comics. And further, the comic creators that really love sports. And I mean, Ron Mars and Frank Thierry are huge sports fans. Jimmy Palmiotti, a big sports fan. Certainly Rob Liefeld, huge NBA fan.
I think the
And
first three people you named are all like diehard Mets fans. Like comic
well,
people love
should
the
throw
Mets.
Didio in there too, because Didio's a big Mets fan. That's hilarious. Yeah, no, definitely baseball fans, no question. Although I think Frank might be a Yankee guy. I could be wrong.
I could be wrong about that too. But yeah, it is funny. There is like a lot of Mets fans I've found out there, and yeah, no,
well, those were all New Yorkers that we mentioned, so that makes sense.
That is true. One of my, actually, this is two of my dream guests. I would love. There's two basketball players who are twins, Brooke and Robin Lopez, and they're big comic book guys, and I would love to have them on my show.
Oh man, I know. And I there's been some actors like people on CSI, the regular CSI show, and it was like, hey, by the way, he knows you and he really likes your show. I'm like, get the hell out of here! And I can't remember the actor's name. Scott Porter.
Oh, right, big comic guy.
And I love that fact that Scott, he's great, and he's such a good-looking guy, and I always give him grief, and it's like, stop listening. And I mean, he's married now, and he's got babies and stuff. At the time, he was still single, and I'm like, stop listening to me and go out there and date more women. Because if I looked like you, I would not be wasting my time listening to me. I would be meeting more women because you are too good-looking. And he's laughing and stuff. He took it as the compliment it was intended to be. But yeah, I mean, it's just, seriously, I am like, why are you wasting your time listening to me? Or God, huge compliment. Seth Meyers and his producers and stuff. Bendis is like, they know Word Balloon. And I'm like, get out of here. And he goes, are you kidding? In my pre-interview, he goes, they were quoting stuff from our talks. I'm like, wow, jeez, that's fantastic. I'm like, get me Seth Meyers. Or Conan O'Brien. It'd be great to talk comics with Conan.
Yeah.
Because he's clearly such a fan.
Well, next question for you. 12 years in, which creator or comic personality would you most like to book on the show that hasn't been on already?
Oh, there's a couple. I mean, I would love to talk to Stan Lee. I don't have a big enough audience for Stan Lee to bother with me, but that would be fun. Steranko is a guy. He's been like a guy that I've pursued. And, he likes being the Orson Welles or the J.D. Salinger of comics and really enjoys saying no more than yes. I've had several off-the-record conversations with Steranko, and he's always been very kind. And it's so funny because there's a great piece that he made of his character Chandler, one of his detective characters. And it's just this one image, but there's so many Easter eggs in it. You can kind of tell this story just from this single image. And he was starting to explain it to a person that was about to buy the print. It was a print that he made for the Society of Illustrators back in the 1980. And I had my recorder with me and I'm like, Jim, I've got my recorder right now. I'm like, can I at least record this story? I said, I would never do it without asking you. I said, but you're about to tell the story now. I've got the recorder. I go, even this would just be great. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he's like, John, I really appreciate you asking me the way that you just did. And the answer is no. and I laughed and he laughed. And it's like, okay, that's all right. If it never happens with Steranko, it's mostly old timers.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm optimistic because even a guy like Neil Gaiman, who before I had the podcast, I had a couple lovely conversations with him when he came to the University of Chicago for a couple seminars and stuff. And I don't know why, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, the stars will align and I think I'll have a chance and I'll talk to him. Yeah. Alan Moore obviously would be another great guy to talk to. I've talked to a few of his collaborators, Dave Gibbons being one, Kevin O'Neill being another. And I think I have enough perspective that I think I could do a decent job talking to Alan Moore. I hope. So yeah, there's a few names.
Those are a great list. Last question for you, and this is the easiest, but it's the most. It's going to show something because it's the ultimate nightmare for an interviewer. In your 12 years of comic book interviewing, have you ever lost an interview simply because you've got to press record?
Oh, fuck yeah.
Oh, my God. I have two.
Kevin Smith, real early on, when he was wrapping up Daredevil and handing it off to Bendis, I screwed up an interview with him. God, a recent one, and it wasn't comic books, but this guy, and I can't remember his name right now, Steve Bannon, I want to say. He was this incredible television producer that he produced the 68 Elvis comeback special. He was part of the production crew of this great rock and roll film called The Tammy Show, which was this very big black and white. It was filmed in black and white, but this huge, like mid-60s concert that featured James Brown and the Rolling Stones and the Beach Boys and all these incredible acts. And he also did the Star Wars Holiday Special. He was the director.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, and we had this wonderful conversation and the recording didn't work. And I'm just like, oh, fuck. And a good story, and this shows you how gracious the guy was. Very early on, Gene Colan did an interview with him. It didn't work. And I'm like, Mr. Colan, I can't even believe I have the gall to ask you. Can we please reschedule? He's like, oh, yeah, I like talking to you. You're like Bob Costas. I like talking to you. And I'm like, oh, I can't thank you enough. In the next New York, I saw him, and I'm like, and this was a couple of years before he had passed, so he was still in decent health at the time I spoke to him. Could not, and I did see him near the end too. Such a sweet man. And I'm so glad, I mean, I'm really fortunate. We mentioned Ringo early on. Some of the creators that have passed, Dwayne McDuffie is a guy like that. I'm so glad I had the opportunity to talk to them and get a great conversation. I know Mark Maron, feels the same way when a celebrity passes that he's had on his show. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure, unfortunately, when that time comes and with your body, you'll be like, God, I'm really glad I had a chance to talk to Creator X.
Right.
And it's just this really great feeling, and also I'm really glad the audience responds as well. And that's where I do kind of feel like Word Balloon, because of it being around for 12 years, has reached this period of or level of, I've got that many interviews that I can do a retrospective when someone passes, or on a better subject, like when The Flash had its 70th anniversary of creation, and I had all these different creators talking about The Flash and what it was like. And or when it was announced, I actually at the time of Rebirth, when Watchmen was suddenly, the premise of Watchmen entering the DC universe and what does it mean? I've had so many people on, not only Dave, but also other creators talking about the creator rights aspect of Watchmen and the pluses and minuses, and also a lot of the before Watchmen creators that wanted to contribute and do stories about these characters, and them understanding the tightrope that they were walking in terms of, yes, I want to do this, but I know there's a big segment of the audience that probably thinks I'm an asshole for doing this. Mm-hmm. So very interesting. So yeah, I mean, it's been, and that's where I kind of do feel like, all right, Word Balloon is kind of, like I said, delivering this unofficial small J journalism history of comics that I can pull on when an interesting story comes up like that, and we can kind of look back and see, what the point of view was as this stuff was happening.
Yeah. I suppose this is a good time to mention the fact that I actually forgot to press record on this one.
Oh, fuck.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I know. That's right.
Yeah. John, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me. I really appreciate you taking the time. And, I'm sure you have other podcasts to record, but thanks for coming on mine.
David, truly, I thank you for asking me. I do enjoy your show, and I wish you continued success, because I want something to listen to just as much as everybody else does. Yeah. And you do a good job, and I look forward to your shows.
I appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with the host of the comic book podcast Word Balloon, John Siuntres. You can find John on Twitter at @JohnWordBalloon, on the show's website at wordballoon.com, and anywhere you can find podcasts, besides Spotify, because we haven't been invited yet. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and you want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all of my existing patrons, including Dan Lee, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kessley, Brian Dickerson, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Johan Barander, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Matt Pataglia, Alec Bernal, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher, and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen, as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.